And I do think that the current models are wasting a ton of capacity remembering stuff that doesn't matter. Like they remember SHA hashes, they remember like the ancient...
Because the data set is not curated the best it
Yeah,
can be.
exactly. And I think this will go away. And I think we just need to get to the cognitive core. And I think the cognitive core can be extremely small. And it's just this thing that thinks. And if it needs to look up information, it knows how to use different tools.
Is that like 3 billion parameters? Is that 20 billion parameters?
I think even a billion suffices. We'll probably get to that point. And the models can be very, very small. And I think the reason they can be very small is fundamentally, I think, just like distillation works. It may be like the only thing I would say. Distillation works like surprisingly well. Distillation is where you get a really big model or a huge amount of compute or something like that, supervising a very small model. And you can actually stuff a lot of capability into a very small model.
Is there some sort of like mathematical representation of that or some information theoretical like formulation of that? Because it almost feels like you should be able to calculate that now in terms of what's the...
Maybe like one way to think about it is like, we go back to like the internet data set, which is what we're working with. The internet is like 0.001% cognition and like 99.99% of like information is just like, whatever.
Garbage, yeah.
And I think most of it is not useful to the thinking part. And it's like,
I guess maybe another way to frame the question is like, is there a mathematical representation of cognitive capability relative to model size? Or how do you capture cognition in terms of, here's the min or max relative to what you're trying to accomplish? And maybe there's no good way to represent that. So I think maybe 1 billion parameters gets you sort of like a good cognitive core.
I think probably right. I think even 1 billion is too much. I don't know. We'll see.
It's very exciting, given if you think about, it's a question of like on an edge device versus on the cloud, but...
And also this raw cost of using the model and everything. Yeah, it's very exciting.
Right, but at less than 1 billion parameters, I have my exocortex on a local device as well.
Yeah, and then probably it's not a single model, right? Like it's interesting to me to think about what this will actually play out like. Because I do think you want to benefit from parallelization. You don't want to have a sequential process, you want to have a parallel process. And I think companies to some extent are also kind of like parallelization of work. But there's a hierarchy in a company because that's one way to you have the information processing and the reductions that need to happen within the organization for information. So I think we'll probably end up with companies of LLMs. I think it's not unlikely to me that you have models of different capabilities specialized to various unique domains. Maybe there's a programmer, etc. And it will actually start to resemble companies to a very large extent. So the programmer and the program manager and similar kinds of roles of LLMs working in parallel and coming together and orchestrating computation on your behalf. So maybe it's not correct to think about it. It's more like a swarm. Your exocortex is like a swarm.
It feels like an ecosystem. It's like a biological ecosystem where you have specialized roles and niches.
And I think it will start to resemble that.
You have automatic escalation to other parts of the swarm depending on the difficulty of the problem and the specialization.
So maybe the CEO is like a really brilliant cloud model. But the workers can be a lot cheaper, maybe even open source models or whatnot.
And my cost function is different from your cost function.
Yeah, so that could be interesting.
You left OpenAI, you're working on education. You've always been an educator. Like, why do this?
I would start with, I've always been an educator and I love learning and I love teaching. And so it's kind of just like a space that I've been very passionate about for a long time. And then the other thing is, I think one macro picture that's kind of driving me is, I think there's a lot of activity in like AI and I think most of it is to kind of like replace or displace people, I would say. It's in the theme of like sliding away the people, but I'm always more interested in anything that kind of empowers people. And I feel like I'm kind of on a high level like team human, and I'm interested in things that AI can do to empower people. And I don't want the future where people are kind of on the side of automation. I want people to be very in an empowered state, and I want them to be amazing, much more amazing than today. And then other aspects that I find very interesting is like, how far can a person go if they have the perfect tutor for all the subjects? And I think people could go really far if they had the perfect curriculum for anything. And I think we see that with, if some rich people maybe have tutors and they do actually go really far. And so I think we can approach that with AI or even like surpass it.
There's very clear literature on that actually from the 80s, right? Where one-on-one tutoring, I think, helps people get one standard deviation better than
Bloom.
Is it two? Yeah, it's the Bloom stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of really interesting precedents on that. How do you actually view that as substantiating through the lens of AI? Or what's the first types of products that will really help with that? Or, because there's books like The Diamond Age where they talk about the young lady's illustrated primer and all that kind of stuff.
So I would say I'm definitely inspired by aspects of it. So like in practice, what I'm doing is trying to currently build a single course. And I want it to be just like the course you would go to if you want to learn AI. I think the problem with basically is like, I've already taught courses, like I taught 231N at Stanford, and that was the first deep learning class and was pretty successful. But the question is like, how do you actually like really scale these classes? Like, how do you make it so that your target audience is maybe like 8 billion people on Earth? And they're all speaking different languages and they're all different capability levels, et cetera. So, and a single teacher doesn't scale to that audience. And so the question is how to use AI to sort of like do the scaling of a really good teacher. And so the way I'm thinking about it is the teacher is kind of doing a lot of the course creation and the curriculum, because currently at the current AI capability, I don't think the models are good enough to create a good course, but I think they're good to become the front end to the student and interpret the course to them. And so basically the teacher doesn't go to the people, and the teacher is not the front end anymore. The teacher is on the back end designing the materials in the course, and the AI is the front end, and it can speak all the different languages, and it kind of like takes you through the course.
Should I think of that as like the TA type experience, or is that not a good analogy here?
That is like one way I'm thinking about it. Is it's AI TA. I'm mostly thinking of it as like this front end to the student, and it's the thing that's actually interfacing with the student and taking them through the course. And I think that's tractable today, and it just doesn't exist, and I think it can be made really good. And then over time, as the capability increases, you would potentially refactor the setup in various ways. I like to find things where, like the AI capability today and having a good model of it, and I think a lot of companies that maybe don't quite understand intuitively where the capability is today, and then they end up kind of like building things that are kind of like too ahead of what's available, or maybe not ambitious enough. And so I think I do think that this is kind of a sweet spot of what's possible and also really interesting and exciting. So
I want to go back to something you said that I think is very inspiring, especially coming from like your background and understanding of where exactly we are in research, which is essentially like we do not know what the limits of human performance from a learning perspective are, given much better tooling. And I think there's like a very easy analogy to, we just had the Olympics like a month ago, right? And you know, a runner and it's the very best mile time, or pick any sport today, is much better than it was, putting aside performance enhancing drugs like 10 years ago, just because like you start training earlier, you have a very different program, we have much better scientific understanding, we have technique, we have gear. The fact that you believe like we can get much further as humans if we're starting with like the tooling and the curriculum is amazing.
Yeah, I think we haven't even scratched like what's possible at all. So I think there's like two dimensions basically to it. Is number one is the globalization dimension of like I want everyone to have really good education, but the other one is like how far can a single person go?
Yeah.
And I think both of those are very interesting and exciting.
Usually when people talk about one-on-one learning, they talk about the adaptive aspect of it, where you're challenging person at the level that they're at. Yeah. Do you think you can do that with AI today, or is that something for the future? And it's more, today it's about reach and multiple languages and globalization.
I think the low-hanging fruit is things like, for example, different languages. Super low-hanging fruit. I think the current models are actually really good at translation, basically, and can target the material and translate it like at the spot. So I think a lot of things are low-hanging fruit. This adaptability to a person's background, I think, is like not at the low-hanging fruit, but I don't think it's like too high up or too much away. But that is something you definitely want, because not everyone is coming in with the same background. And also what's really helpful is like if you're familiar with some other disciplines in the past, then it's really useful to make analogies to the things you know. And that's extremely powerful in education. So that's definitely a dimension you want to take advantage of. But I think that starts to get to the point where it's like not obvious and needs some work. I think like the easy version of it is not too far, where you can imagine just prompting the model. It's like, oh, hey, I know physics, or I know this. And you probably get something. But I guess what I'm talking about is something that actually works, not something that like you can demo and work sometimes. So I just mean like it actually really works and in the way a person would.
Yeah. And that's the reason I was asking about adaptability, because also people learn at different rates, or certain things they find challenging that others don't, or vice versa. And so it's a little bit of how do you modulate relative to that context. And I guess you could have some reintroduction of what the person is good or bad at into the model over time as you.
That's the thing with AI. I feel like a lot of these capabilities are just kind of like prompt away. So you always get like demos, but like, do you actually get a product? You know what I mean? So, so in this sense, I would say the demo is near, but the product is far.
So one thing we were talking about earlier, which I think is really interesting, is sort of lineages. That happens in the research community where you come from certain labs and everybody gossips about being from each other's labs. I think a very high proportion of Nobel laureates actually used to work in a former Nobel laureate's lab. So there's some propagation of, I don't know if it's culture or knowledge or branding or what. And in an AI education-centric world, how do you maintain lineage, or does it not matter? Or how do you think about those aspects of propagation of network and knowledge?
I don't actually want to live in a world where lineage like matters too much, right? So I'm hoping that AI can help you destroy that structure a little bit. It feels like kind of gatekeeping by some finite scarce resource, which is like, oh, there's a finite number of people who have this lineage, et cetera. So I feel like it's a little bit of that aspect. So I'm hoping it can destroy that.
It's definitely one piece, like actual learning, one piece pedigree. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's also the aggregation of, it's a cluster effect, right? It's like, why is all of the, or much of the AI community in the Bay Area? Or why is most of the fintech community in New York?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of it is also just you're clustering really smart people with common interests and beliefs, and then they kind of propagate from that common core, and then they share knowledge in an interesting way. You got to agree a lot of that behavior has shifted online to some extent, particularly for younger people.
I think one aspect of it is kind of like the educational aspect, where like if you're part of a community today, you're getting a ton of education and apprenticeship, et cetera, which is extremely helpful and gets you to a point of empowered state in that area. I think the other piece of it is like the cultural aspect of what you're motivated by and what you want to work on. What does the culture prize and what do they put on a pedestal and what do they kind of like worship, basically? So in academic world, for example, is the H index. Everyone cares about the H index, the amount of papers you publish, et cetera. And I was part of that community and I saw that. And I feel like now I've come to different places and there's different idols in all the different communities. And I think that has a massive impact of what people are motivated by and where they get their social status and what actually matters to them. I also was, I think, part of different communities, like growing up in Slovakia, also a very different environment. Being in Canada, also a very different environment.
What mattered there?
So, sorry?
Thank you.
Oh, hockey. Yeah,
Hockey. I would say, as an example, I would say in Canada, I was in University of Toronto and Toronto. I don't think it's a very entrepreneurial pilled environment. It doesn't even occur to you that you should be starting companies. I mean, it's not something that people are doing. You don't know friends who are doing it. You don't know that you're supposed to be looking up to it. People aren't like reading books about all the founders and talking about them. It's just not a thing you aspire to or care about. And what everyone is talking about, is where are you getting your internship? Where are you going to work afterwards? And it's just accepted that there's a fixed set of companies that you are supposed to pick from and just align yourself with one of them. And that's like what you look up to or something like that. So these cultural aspects are extremely strong and maybe actually the dominant variable. Because I almost feel like today already the education aspects I think are the easier one, like a ton of stuff is already available, etc. So I think mostly it's the cultural aspect that you're part of.
So on this point, like one thing you and I were talking about a few weeks ago is, and I think you also posted online about this, there's a difference between learning and entertainment. And learning is actually supposed to be hard. And I think it relates to this question of like, status and what like, status is a great motivator, like who the idol is. How much do you think you can change in terms of motivation through systems like this, if that's like a blocking factor? Are you focused on give people the resources such that they can get as far as possible in the sequence for their own capability as they can, like further than any other point in history, already inspirational? Or do you actually want to change how many people want to learn? Or at least bring themselves down the path. Want is a loaded word.
I would say like, I want to make it much easier to learn. And then maybe it is possible that maybe people don't want to learn. I mean, today, for example, people want to learn for practical reasons, right? Like they want to get a job, etc., which makes total sense. So in a pre-AGI society, education is useful. And I think people will be motivated by that because they're climbing up the ladder economically, etc.
But in the post-AGI society, we're just all going to be...
Post-AGI society, I think education is entertainment to a much larger extent.
Including like successful outcomes education, right? Not just letting the content wash over you.
Yes, I think so.
Outcomes being like understanding, learning, being able to contribute new knowledge, or however you define it.
I think it's not an accident that if you go back 200 years, 300 years, the people who were doing science were nobility or people of wealth.
We will all be nobility learning with Andrej. Yeah.
I do think that I see it very much equivalent to your quote earlier. Like, I feel like learning something is kind of like going to the gym, but for the brain, right? Like, it feels like going to the gym. I mean, going to the gym is fun. People like to lift, etc. Some people don't go to the gym.
No. Some people do, but it takes effort. Yeah,
it takes effort, but it's effortful, but it's also kind of fun. And you also have a payoff, like you feel good about yourself in various ways, right? And I think education is basically equivalent to that. So that's what I mean when I say education should not be fun, etc. I mean, it is kind of fun, but it's like a specific kind of fun, I suppose, right? I do think that maybe in a post-AGI world, what I would hope happens is people actually, they do go to the gym a lot, not just physically, but also mentally, and is something that we look up to as being highly educated and also, just.
Can I ask you one last question about Eureka, just because I think it'll be interesting to people? Like, who is the audience for the first course?
The audience for the first course, I'm mostly thinking of this as like an undergrad level course. So if you're doing undergrad in a technical area, I think that would be kind of the ideal audience. I do think that what we're seeing now is we have this like antiquated concept of education where you go through school and then you graduate and go to work, right? Obviously, this will totally break down, especially in a society that's turning over so quickly. But people are going to come back to school a lot more frequently as the technology changes very, very quickly. So it is kind of like undergrad level, but I would say like anyone at that level at any age is kind of like in scope. I think it will be very diverse in age, as an example, but I think it is mostly like people who are technical and mostly actually want to understand it to a good amount.
When can they take the course?
I was hoping it would be late this year. I do have a lot of distractions that are piling on, but I think probably early next year is kind of like the timeline. Yeah, I'm trying to make it very, very good. And it just takes time to get there. So.
I have one last question, actually, that's pseudo-related to that. If you have little kids today, what do you think they should study in order to have a useful future?
There's a correct answer in my mind. And the correct answer is mostly like, I would say like math, physics, CS kind of disciplines. And the reason I say that is because I think it helps for just thinking skills. It's just like the best thinking skill core is my opinion. And of course I have a specific background, etc. So I would think this, but that's just my view on it. I think like, me taking physics classes and all these other classes just like shape the way I think, and I think it's very useful for problem solving in general, etc. And so if we're in this world where pre-AGI, this is going to be useful. Post-AGI, you still want empowered humans who can function in any arbitrary capacity. And so I just think that this is just the correct answer for people and what they should be doing and taking. And it's either useful or it's good. And so I just think it's the right answer. And I think a lot of the other stuff you can tack on a bit later, but the critical period where people have a lot of time and they have a lot of kind of like attention and time, I think should be mostly spent on doing these kinds of symbol manipulation heavy tasks and workloads, not memory heavy tasks and workloads.
Yeah, I did a math degree and I felt like there was a new groove being carved into my brain as I was doing that.
And it's a harder groove to carve later.
And I would, of course, put in a bunch of other stuff as well. Like, I'm not opposed to all the other disciplines, etc. I think it's actually beautiful to have a large diversity of things, but I do think 80% of it should be something like this.
One, we're not efficient memorizers compared to our tools. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah,
it's so much fun.
Amazing.
Yes, it's great to be here.
Find us on Twitter at NoPriorspod. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to see our faces. Follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. That way you get a new episode every week. And sign up for emails or find transcripts for every episode at no-priors.com.